All right, hello and welcome back to the NNP Symposium 2021. This hour we are joined by Pierre Fricke, and he will be discussing on the Fugio coppers of 1787. Without further ado, I will quickly pass this off to Pierre, but quick reminder that you can use your Q&A feature to submit questions throughout the presentation. We're going to hold off on answering those till the end if we have time before the next one. So without further ado, I'll pass it off.
Hey, thank you, Matthew. My name is Pierre Fricke. I've been a collector for a long time, a dealer probably a little bit more recently off and on. I'm an early American coppers guy since I was a kid, 10, 12 years old, I think. I started collecting large cents. They seemed more interesting to me than some of the 20th century things that I started with even younger. They were cool, you know, Lincoln cents and Morgan dollars, and my mom and them got into Morgan dollars and that kind of stuff. But I really kind of gravitated to large cents, and then a paper money more recently in around 2000. I got into paper money. I've been a dealer as well in the 80s and 90s a little bit, and then since 03, part-time. I still work in high tech. I've worked at companies like IBM and Red Hat, and now Rackspace. Retirement might be in my near future. I don't know. We'll see. We probably have a little bit more time to do that. But I enjoy this. This is a lot of fun. Today we're going to focus in on Fugio coppers of 1787. This is a very interesting coin. Being a large cent guy, I got really interested in it because it was sort of the coin right before the large cent. And actually, when we go through this, you'll see that there was a lot of stuff, a lot set up the large cents and half cents in the U.S. Mint in many ways. Let me see here. There we go. So this is an example of, so this is going to be the Fugio coppers of 1787. Here's a picture of what the coin looks like. The obverse is on the left, the reverse is on the right. So let's go into a little bit of background. As we exited the Revolutionary War and we had a peace treaty in 1783, and the Confederation articles that sort of formed a loose confederation of states. It was legal at that point under the Articles of Confederation for states to have money, and so they did. They had things like copper coinage, for example, and so countries or states like Connecticut, the Republic of Vermont. Vermont was not a state until 1791. It was actually independent at some point there for a little while. New Jersey was getting ready. Massachusetts would do some coins, things like that. So there were state contractors minting copper coiners for small change. I believe John Kralevich and other people have done a lot of research and work on the coinage that circulated throughout the United States. A lot of it was foreign coinage. We're not going to get into all that here. This is actually the attempt to move away from that, and in particular with the Fugio copper and some of the state coinage, the new American government really wanted to move away from foreign copper coins in particular. This was an attempt to make that happen. So you see that in 1786, foreign copper coins was outlawed. A gentleman by the name of James Jarvis acquires the company for coining coppers in New Haven, Connecticut in this time frame. We're going to talk more about him in a little bit. Contractors made proposals to Congress. There was no U.S. Mint. Everything was contracted out to private mints. These were the names of the 4 other people that submitted proposals: Boyd, Barton, Simpson, and Ogden. James Jarvis came in October 1786. Jarvis promised 600,000 pounds of copper coinage in 3 years. Another person we're going to touch base on here is William Duer. He became secretary of the Board of the Treasury. Jarvis, out of those 5 proposals, wins the Fugio proposal. He gets it through corruption and sort of an American tradition, maybe a human tradition. A $10,000 bribe to Duer and shared profits with the government. And Jarvis had already received 12,000 pounds of copper. And the Fugio copper design was approved in July 6th, 1787. So this is sort of the background, a sort of a setup. Some key people here. There aren't a lot of pictures of people from this period, you know, unlike when you get to the Civil War, there's photographs, and they actually had cameras by that point. They didn't have that back then in this time frame. So Ben Franklin, of course, he was a famous person in many, many ways, one of which was influencing our money, printing money. in Pennsylvania. He influenced the design of this, and we're going to get into the design a little bit. But it was his, Fugio, I Fly, the time motifs and We Are One type stuff that was really his idea. William Dewar was the secretary of the Board of the Treasury, who was making the decision or driving the decision from the government's perspective on who was going to get this contract. So James Jarvis owned, the New Haven Mint, became the majority owner of the New Haven Mint. He was baptized in 1856 in Oyster Bay, New York, so he was a pretty young individual at the time. He was trained in the family business as a felter and other kinds of light manufacturing type implements. In 1775, as the Revolutionary War was heating up, at 19 years old, he became third lieutenant in the Bold Foresters of New York unit. I don't know the history of that unit, but he was part of that. His signature did appear. I don't know if he actually personally signed it or it was printed. I don't know. I have to go research that a bit more. But his signature did appear on some of the 1776 New York paper money. He fled to Norwalk, Connecticut, in the face of the British occupation of New York in 1776. British moved down from Boston and took over New York City, drove Washington's troops across the Hudson River, and proceeded to press them further into New Jersey, and then ultimately Valley Forge in Pennsylvania. But a lot of people, some people stayed in New York. New York City actually burned in 1776 around this time frame, and New York City at that time was really not much further north of Wall Street. I mean, it was a little bit further north of Wall Street, but not much further north of Wall Street. Most of that north of that was countryside with some habitation. So it was a much smaller city than today, of course. But he fled to New York in the face of the occupation, got into merchant, became a merchant. He backed a privateering venture to attack British shipping in Boston in 1781. There's not much detail about what that was, but I found that kind of interesting. So he was in Boston. He got involved with the company for coining coppers in New Haven, which is known as the New Haven Mint, in November 1785. Becomes not quite a half owner, but a bit more of a 30% owner in April 1786, majority owner in 1787. The Fugio copper saga spanned 1787 to 1789, and then he received his final payment for what was delivered in 1791. Now, I didn't find much about his later in life, although I did find an unpublished book about James Jarvis and Fugio coppers that's 100-something pages long on the internet that was never published, written some years ago, that I need to read the rest of it. Another gentleman was Abel Buell. He was the engraver of the dies. He's got a kind of a checkered history. He was a counterfeiter earlier, before the Fugio saga, earlier in the pre-revolutionary, early Revolutionary War. Counterfeiter by altering 5-pound notes, engraving plates into larger denomination plates, and printing money. He had an interesting sentence. I couldn't resist putting this in here. He was sentenced to be branded above the forehead, under the scalp, loss of a portion of his right ear, and life in prison, plus forfeiture of all his lands and estates. Now, he was a young guy. He did get a portion of his ear cut off, and I don't think he got branded. I think he ended up serving a little time in prison, and then he was let go, sort of forgiven. He got into the minting business. He invented a minting machine, and was involved in the New Haven Mint to help mint the state of Connecticut's copper coins, or Connecticut coppers. And he engraved the dies for a good number, if not all of them, or oversaw it for the Connecticut and Fugio coppers. After the Fugio saga, which it kind of fell apart, and we're going to get into why that was. In 1789, Buell went to England to steal the secrets of cotton manufacturing from the British, which is a pretty interesting thing. I mean, industrial espionage was nothing new. I don't know that he was really successful in doing that. I think he actually did bring some stuff back. And later in life, he joined with David Greenleaf to fashion some of the first steel swords manufacturers that were for the U.S. government. Those swords were used in the War of 1812, and some of them were used in the Civil War, by the way. So he had a pretty big impact in that dimension. The origin of the design is from this continental currency coin or pattern, or there's a variety of studies on this that say this isn't really a coin in the traditional sense, but it's certainly a very important piece of numismatic history or exonumia history, depending on how you want to frame it. And on here, you see the foundation for the design of the Fugio copper. And this was Ben Franklin inspiration that you see Fugio, mind your business, the sundial. We're going to get into all that and what it means. And then you see the American Congress, we are one. There was one Fugio copper with that similar design on the back. That's a very rare example with the names of the states in the chain. So this was this, and it showed up on paper money too. During the Continental Currency paper money series, you'll find the front design on some of the third dollar, 2/3 dollar and dollar notes and things like that are actually very interesting to collect too. So here's the Fugio copper obverse, I should say. This is about the size of a large cent, a little bit smaller than a $half. We'll get into the weights in a few minutes, but I want to just talk about the design. Fugio is on the left, the date 1787 is to the right. All of these were dated 1787. You see a sundial. So what this really means is Fugio is Latin for I fly. The sundial represents time. So time flies. That's kind of where the saying comes from. And then below that, it says mind your business, which is kind of funny, especially when you think about it in terms of what we think of mind your business today means. But back then, mind your business meant something different. Back then, it meant look to your own business, look to your own affairs. And so what Ben Franklin is telling us here is time flies, so look to your own affairs, take care of your own business. You know, I could say wholeheartedly the time does fly, and you know, before you know it, you know, you're a lot older than you were. So I mean, he really is. This is a good piece of wisdom. I don't know exactly how mind your business turned into stay out of my business versus looking to my own business, but somewhere between the 1780s and today, and it's probably been the 19th century if I had to guess, somewhere in there, this turned into stay out of my business that we think of it as today. The reverse is a chain with large links, circular links that represent the 13 states. I don't have a picture of it here, but on the Continental Currency, you saw the chains links had all the state names. There is a Fugio variety, the Continental, the American Congress version, modeled after that is a very rare piece. In the middle, you see United States or States United in various forms. We'll talk about that, and we are one. Something maybe we ought to make some more coins and money like this today, and remind people a little bit more that we're better as one than as divided as we can be sometimes. Certainly, in this time there was Division II, and this was a coin to get people thinking about us being one country. One other thing I'll point out is the design of this chain didn't invoke the chains of slavery like it did in the 1793 chain set, because it didn't look like a typical chain that you'd chain a person up with, because of circular, bigger loops. So there was no outcry on this particular design, and I like to think of this as the first chain set in some ways, which it is. But the chain on the chain set, the 1793 chain set, was a different design. The narrower, longer, elongated links that we think of chaining people up, which didn't last long for that very reason. So this is this chain motif materialized in several different forms, probably in the most controversial form on the 1793 chain set. There was no controversy here about this design. All right, so what was Jarvis? So Jarvis had his minting operation. So what was he doing? He signed the contract in May of 1787. He had some due dates, some things were due. He had 25 tons of coins due in the end of the year. He had 25 more tons due in the end of the first quarter of 1788. They all were dated 1787. At this point, the value assigned to this was 157.5 grains. Coins, a dollar of coin worth of 100 of those coins would equal 2.25 pounds of copper, approximately. So these coins were designed to be around 157.5 grains, which was bigger than or heavier than the Connecticut coppers and some of the state coinage, and that's going to be important in a minute when we talk about why that was important. James Jarvis, part of the deal was he had to pay. The government got to share some of the profits. The deal he cooked with the government, he had to pay off some of the profits. He was looking for some more copper. James Jarvis leaves New Haven for Europe. His father-in-law, Samuel Brune, was left in charge, and they proceeded to convert, in the sense of stealing, the U.S. government copper, and made the more profitable Connecticut coppers, which were somewhat lighter, like 20% lighter in weight approximately. The dies were engraved by Abel Buell. Jarvis was striking a deal for 300 tons of finished coppers or getting finished coppers done in Europe, actually, not minted by himself, in Europe, and 100 tons done by September 1788. Needless to say, with the copper being converted, Jarvis over in Europe trying to get finished coins, the deadline 1787 was missed. Less than 5 tons were delivered by mid-1788, which instead of the 4 million plus coins that were planned, less than 400,000 coins were made. And in general, given a lot of the copper was used for Connecticut's, they had to scrounge around for copper from any source in the United States, and literally they were using barrel bands, the copper barrel bands, which is terrible quality copper, to make these coins. So these coins are made, Fugio coppers are made with poor quality copper, hence a lot of planchet flaws and various striations and things are very common on these coins. And even in mid-state examples, that's actually they're shown more prominently on mid-state examples and circulated examples. You can find them without those planchet flaws, but they tend to command premiums to be a little bit scarcer. So there was something else going on this time. The copper market in 1788 began falling, the value. So we were back at $1 equals 2.5 pounds of copper. Now we're, as we moved into 1788, further into 1788, we see $1 now is 3 pounds of copper. The new cent, now we're, instead of 157 grains, was 210 grains. So the Fugio copper is now 3/4 of a cent, and made them basically unprofitable to do, based on the contract. So Jarvis could deliver no more. The government, as I mentioned before, the government copper was used for Connecticut coppers. The Bolton deal for the finished coins was never consummated. Jarvis was fired. He delivered less than 400,000 coppers. A gentleman by the name of Royal Flint in New York attempted to circulate what was minted. He did have success in circulating these coins. Unfortunately, he bought them at some number more than 3/4 of a cent and some number less than a penny. We don't know what that was, but that he bought it for too much. He paid too much for them. And what ended up happening there was he failed and he couldn't pay his debts. And here's a situation where someone was trying to make something help with the coin, failed due to the debt, and it went to debtor's prison. Back then, that's what it was. There wasn't the bankruptcies laws that we have today. This fiasco set the stage for the United States Mint, which began patterns in 1792, and then the chain wreath large cents, Liberty Cap large cents, and 1793 half cents in 1793. A little sidebar here. You move when you read the front of Sheldon's early cents or penny whimsy book, you get a view of the mint, the first years of the mint, at least with respect to looking at copper production, which was the direct descendant of this coin. And you find they also had problems. They had different kinds of problems, and yellow fever and other kinds of things affected the mint. The Congress of the United States was getting very frustrated, and the Treasury Department was getting very frustrated. By 1800, frustration with the mint led to a proposal to contract out U.S. coinage again. That didn't happen. We'd have a much different history of our United States coinage if that did, but that didn't happen. But I thought that was kind of interesting. By 1800, they sort of forgot the experience of 1788, 12 years earlier with Jarvis. Unlike coins, paper money, by the way, was contracted out mostly by banknotes. It wasn't government notes until 1861. They were United States government notes in the continental currency time frame that were also contracted out. But 1861 to 1877, the Federal Bureau of Engraving contracted stuff out to the American Banknote Company. So years later, we used contractors, not for coinage, but for paper money. They didn't have the same types of problems in the 1860s and 70s that we had with Jarvis and some of this. But by 1877, the United States started printing all the paper money too. All right, so some of these coins that Flint didn't get circulated ended up in the Bank of New York. In 1788, the Bank of New York stored several thousands of these in a keg in the basement. These things sat around for two plus three generations and were put into cotton bags and stored away again. Another three generations pass. So you got 5 or 6 generations here. In 1926, they were discovered, and they were given out as souvenirs and keepsakes to clients of the Bank of New York, which that was a typical thing to do in the late 19th century and early 20th century with these kinds of things. In 1948, the American Numismatic Society looked at the remaining 641 coins. Some of the coins were donated to society, and others were sold to collectors at that point. All the coins were mint state; they never were circulated. Most with brown toning, many of them with plan flaws, because I've handled a good number of these. It's varieties like the 11X, 12X, 13X, things like that were big representation in here from those dies. The bank retained 819 of the coins, and contrary, there's been people poking on trying to get them out of there. They're not selling at this point in time. All right, so that's a bit of the history behind it. I found that pretty interesting, as particularly the corruption, the difficulties, and then the fluctuating value of copper, which the Confederation, we weren't under the U.S. Constitution quite yet. The Constitution had been written and was being ratified as these things were being minted, but the Constitution really wasn't quite in place until we get to late 1788, and then of course the election the appointment of Washington as president in early 1789. By then, the Fugio copper, and we're under the Constitution, the Fugio copper saga had ended by that point. So let me just talk a little bit. So here's one of the early designs. This is the first set of dies. The first designs were the Fugio Mind Your Business sundial. They had a cross after the date down below over here. You can see over here a cross under the date. That's the famous cross under date. This is a pretty rare variety, especially in this kind of a grade. You'll see over here to the left at plan flaw. This is what I was talking about, pretty typical of, and then many of them are a lot worse than this, pretty typical of these coins. And this is actually a rare variety and rare grade, to give you an example. So this is one of the first Fugio dies, first designs. The books, I start with the Newman book as really the first organized. These things showed up in numismatic literature and all the way back to Hickcox's book of the 1850s. But I start here with Newman's Fugio, Varieties Fugio, published in the Coin Collector's Journal, which was the foundation of today's work. So he had this is 1949. You can see he describes some of the things we've been talking about here. He has plates and with numbers, and unlike the Sheldon numbers or some varieties where each variety has one number, like a Sheldon 101 or Sheldon 48 for starred reverse, etc. Newman and other colonial or state coinage, I should say, not really colonial, but state coinage, was it had the obverse reverse numbers combination. So a Newman variety would be a 1. You saw the last one was 1L, so it was a 1 obverse 1 reverse and a L reverse. Alan Kessler, some 27 years later, actually took the Newman numbers and produced a book as opposed to an article in a journal. And he simplified the method for identifying these varieties, because it can be kind of tricky figuring out the positions of WER1 and all that. And Kessler did a great job. I still sometimes use this book because he did a great job with his hand-drawn representations of WER1 and the positions of the date and some of the things under Mind Your Business. That's how you really can tell some of these varieties that are more minute. The major varieties are easy to tell, and even the minor varieties compared to some of the more modern coinage are easy to tell too. But this is a great book for that, and this is the book that got me started. It's a rare book. I think I ended up spending $200 and something for it and got it bound. It's been supplanted by other books since then. But in here, I use Kessler's book because he kind of talks. He talks about this being the first United States coin, and there are those that say the Nova Constellatio is the first United States coin. Certainly, from a pattern perspective, that's true. But when it comes to something that circulated with any amount of use, this is the first United States coin for mass use at that point. So that was authorized by the United States. So this gives you, there's some really good descriptions of history in this book. Kessler, let's walk through the major obverse types. I already talked about the cross after date. Within the you get the period after Fugio. There was an interesting error of die number 2 where Fugio, the G didn't really get what struck, was actually put on the die as a C, so it's called Fusio, made from a C punch, and it was not altered back to be fixed. So you see, that's actually a rare error and a really cool major variety. Another cool major error, which is pretty rare. I mean, there's not too many. I can't think of too many coins that have this kind of a problem. There's lots of overdates in coinage. 1810 over 09 large cents all the way through the gold. You've got all kinds of overdates, 1799 over 8 pennies, etc. But here's one where you got the 1 over a 1 that's sideways here. You got a 1 that's sideways under the so they call it 1 over horizontal 1 of the date. Obverse 10. This is rare. It comes in 2 varieties. It's a red book variety. The concave rays. So another way to tell the varieties is you look at the rays around the sun, and there's concave where these ends are they're thick rays, and the ends are concave, being inverted, inverted internally, like a concave mirror. Convex rays, where they're thicker rays and they bulge out instead of bulging in. These are more common. Obverse 3s and 4s. The blunt rays. Pointed rays are the most common, where you see they're all individual points, which covers most of the varieties. If you want a type coin, that's the easiest one to get, is one of the varieties that have pointed rays. When you get to the backs, the major reverse types here, you got the raised rims. You got the United States here around we are 1, and you see that the rims that represent the circle that the United States is in are actually raised up in three dimensions. So that's a tougher, rare variety, a set of varieties. The 8-point star is a cool. Most of the time they have these little cinquefoils, but here you got an 8-point star on the reverse Y. For some reason, we don't know why. It shows up on the top and the bottom. This is the standard incused letters of United States with the flat rim versus the raised rims over here. Here's the American Congress design. This comes right out of the continental currency example I showed before. This is some view this is a pattern versus a coin struck for circulation, but it does have a variety. It's variety 3cc, and I think there's 3 or 4 known, and it's a 6-figure coin. I don't have that one in my collection. I could say it's a cool piece. I've seen 1 or 2 of these over the years. They really are cool. United States comes in different configurations. You got United and States above and below. That's the reverse A. Then you got United on the left and States on the right. That covers several of the reverses. The most common are States United. That's probably where most of the type coins that you might collect might have that. And so that's really what the Fugio, when you get into varieties and all that, that's really kind of what they look like. Now we move forward, and so that was Kessler's book. It probably had the simplest representation of the various types. That's why I used that. That book was supplanted by Eric Newman's 2008 book, The United States Fugio Copper Coins of 1787. And this book was done by, published by John Lusk. It's in the Bill Noyes format of the same as his large cent books, which I'll show you in a minute. I find this book very useful. It's got much bigger pictures and things in it. It makes it, it doesn't have the graphs, the design. So sometimes I still go back to Kessler's hand-drawn designs that zero in on the ID points, but this is a cool book. I had the opportunity to spend half a day with Eric Newman at his house when he was around 99 or 100. And that was a wonderful experience. I sat down with him at the table. He brought out some Fugio coppers and patterns and some of the unique stuff he sold, and that was sold later, and when his estate was dispersed through the auctions. And we talked a lot about Fugio coppers, and I had him sign this book. I really kind of treasure that book. It's kind of a special thing. I think he was 99 and around 2010. This is either 2010 or 11 when I met with him at his house and spent about 4 hours with him talking about mainly Fugio coppers and some of the people of the time and so forth, and people he's worked with over the years. And I asked him why he never completed his collection. He never completed he never even got to 50 or 40 varieties. I don't think he even got to 40 varieties. And he really liked the coins, but this wasn't, while it was a love of his, he focused on lots of different things and never really just finished it out. But this was one of his favorite coins. I can't remember how many varieties he had, 30 something varieties, if I remember correctly. That's still a very notable achievement. He had some pretty major things in his collection, especially the odds and ends stuff. If I had to say one thing about his collection, it wasn't so much the varieties of the main issues. It was all the odds and ends that were done either at the period or in the 1860s when the restrikes were made. Had a lot of interesting stuff there. So here's what this book looks like. You can see there's a lot more, the pictures are larger. You've got a lot of interesting nomenclature around to help you identify the variety. So this book is very useful for identifying varieties. You get into descriptions, nice descriptions of dye states. So this is a really good, I really like this book. It's also got the layouts at the top, so it's easy to flip through and find things. And there's a side note to book publishers. It's really good to put things like this at the top of the pages. When you're flipping through, you can find stuff, not just look at the table of contents. The rarity ratings are pretty good. I think they're a little bit out of date, but they'll give you a pretty good idea of how rare some of these things are. He also includes the restrikes. So here's an example of one of the so-called New Haven restrikes that were done, I think, around the Civil War period. And so that's an example of what that looks like. Oops. Then there's two versions of this book. This is the David Bowers Whitman Encyclopedia of Colonial Early American Coins. There was one of these done, I want to say around 2009-ish, 8-ish. And the second edition came out last year. So this is the second edition. I just got it recently. I actually was one of the contributors to this and the Fugio copper pricing. It looks like they listened to me because they have a lot of my prices in there, which are good because the first book had the prices too high. In general, I mean, the prices of these things have gone down a bit. They stabilized last decade at a lower set of price points. Excuse me. But they've been actually coming back up in the past 2 or 3 years. So these things have been strengthening again a little bit. They haven't recovered their highs of 05, 06, 03, 04, 05, 06, but they certainly are starting to strengthen again. And as we near the 250th anniversary, there tends to be interest in colonial period and Revolutionary War period things. 2026 is 5 years away. So here's what this book looks like. Here you've got descriptions of the reverses. Here's a page that talks about the obverse. There's good descriptions in here. Pictures are a little bit hard to tell. They don't really line up. They're not as easy to use as the Newman book or the Kessler book. But the Newman book and Kessler book don't have prices in it. And again, these prices are pretty good in here, at least for right now. They'll age out like most other prices will over time. Here's an example of the price guide. One of the pages. They've got Whitman variety numbers here, and then they got the Newman variety numbers and descriptions. Some of the things they didn't put, like 10G, I don't know why we didn't. I actually suggested putting in a set of prices for that, but they kept with the auction format here. That's cool, except there's been private sales that aren't represented that I know of, and the fact it's a little bit harder to use. I like this format a lot better. So in this case, I would look at 10T, and the prices for 10G being a rare are a little bit higher. They used the Bowers Universal Rarity System. They didn't put in the Sheldon Rarity System. You'd have to do some translation. But URS4, I think, means something along the lines of 5 to 8 known. I think, yeah, 5 to 8 known. URS6, because it's Powers of 2. URS6, Universal Rarity Scale 6, would be 17 to 32 known. So I think 10G might be more URS5 than 4, but whatever. It is tougher than 10T. So you have to do some translation if you want to do the Sheldon scale, but the book is really well done, and the prices are good. I'm sure other people inputted to it because it's not just my prices in here. It's been, we got a set of experts that contributed. It looks like they did a good job taking into account the various input. So some of these outside of the hoard coins, some of these coins are pretty rare and high grades, and they're cheap. the 6W, 7T, you know, the extremely fine here is rare. So extremely fine in AU, you're going to be real hard pressed to find 6Ws. That's that much more than type for money. I mean, that gives you an idea of how good of a buy some of these things are. The Euro S9 is a scarce coin, not a rare coin, but a scarce coin. All right, so let's summarize sort of what we talked about here from a collecting point of view. A lot of people, and I say a lot of people like to have one of these in their collection. I mean, people that collect 20th century coins and maybe have some earlier 19th century coins, they pick one of the colonial coins they have. They pick this because it represents the first authorized United States coin. A lot of people will buy a type coin, and they'll buy it depending on their budget in these different grades, fine up to mint state. The prices have gone up a little bit since I did this presentation 2 or 3 years ago. And I've augmented this presentation and I've updated it some with some of the upfront material too, but I've also changed these prices. These prices line up to what was in Bauer's book. And you might expect to find a few plan flaws for these prices, nothing really bad, but a choice coin may command higher prices than this that doesn't have any plan flaws and it's really choice for the grade. But these are what you can expect to spend. A lot of people collect fine VF, XF, AU, or mint state. It depends on their budget. There's a lot of people that have one coin. The next step up from this would be maybe a red book collection, or actually I'd say probably a subset of the red book collection. There are 15 varieties identified in the red book. 13 are collectible, and what I mean by that's for Sheldon. There's 3 or more known in collectors' hands, or affordable. I want to kind of expand and say affordable, and I use the word affordable loosely because a VF set of those 13 coins is $90,000. According to the 2021 Red Book. So that there's some pretty rare expensive coins, the Fugio, and there's $20,000 in very fine, for example, et cetera. And you could back off a couple of those errors and maybe just get across after date a convex raise and a blunt raise and 8-point star or raised rims. You can get 3 or 4 or 5 coins for far less than this. A bit more than 5 times this money, but far less than this, and that would be a cool exhibit without going to try to get all 13, because some of the 2 or 3 of these 13 are going to be pretty hard to find and pretty expensive. The next steps above this is to move into the varieties, and actually the 40 varieties you could probably get cheaper than the 13 collectible varieties in the Red Book, because you can avoid some expensive coins. So 40 varieties, you need to get 5 R6s, but R6s are not really that expensive at mid to low grade. They're not much more. There are more than type. You might figure on anywhere from 50% to 2 or 3 times type, but unless it's a Red Book variety, they're very affordable for our 6s right now. So 40 varieties is a step. The next step above that would be 50 varieties. That's what I've done. I've collected 50 varieties. Neither Newman nor Ford had 50 varieties, but I think it was more not because they didn't have the money to do it, but more because of their focus. But getting the 50 varieties requires some work and some time and some focus. It's not anything that's just going to fall naturally into your hands. You're going to have to go do search out some things, because you're going to have to get at least 4 R7s, and R7s do command premiums of significance, and R7 means 12 or less known in all grades. My R7s are not high grade. And 51, 52, and 53 are going to be expensive coins. Up to 50, there's some expensive ones in there. But to get 51, 52, and 53, you got to spend some money. There are 8 coins that are R8s, or at least they were R8s. Some of them are unique. The American Congress, I threw into this too, is a 6-figure coin. That would be a complete set. No one's achieved a complete set. I believe one collector may have 58. And there's some collectors that got to 53 or 55. Not very many, a couple. So 50 there's not that many that's gotten to 50. 40 is a lot more common to get to, a lot more affordable. Like I said, I think you can probably get to 40 for 90K or less. I'd have to do the arithmetic. I didn't do it, but I think it's less than that. And with that, I'm going to stop, and we'll go to questions.
Absolutely. Thank you for the fantastic presentation. Remember once again that you all can use the Q&A feature on your devices to submit any questions. And it looks like we have about 15 minutes or so to answer some of these. Starting off with this first one, as a detectorist, if I'm reading this correctly, this is a holy grail of coins to find. Is there any kind of database or record of how far west these coins may have been found? And what are the chances of finding such a coin outside of the East Coast?
Well, it's pretty good because you can come by my table at Long Beach whenever we have that, and I'll have them in Long Beach, California. But not just me; I won't be the only one that has them at Long Beach. But so they and I'm in Texas. You can find them at Texas shows if you mean today. Now, if you mean like if you mean detectors like in metal detecting, that I assume that's what you really mean. I'm being a little bit flippant there, but I don't know. That's an interesting question. I suspect it'd be pretty hard to find these outside of the Northeast, and even then, you'll find them in the Northeast. But I think if you get down even into Virginia or south of Virginia, especially, or west, there were people out there, and there might be something in the ground somewhere, and maybe somebody's found something, but that would be an incredibly rare thing, like in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky. You might find something in Kentucky, but that was a state in 1792. The people that went out there may have had some stuff, but I'm sure somebody did. But you get out to Alabama, I'm farther west of Alabama. I suspect you really need to focus in on New England and really Connecticut, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. That's where this stuff mainly, the Boston-Philly corridor mainly would be where these things circulated.
Absolutely. How have you been to Abel Buell's house? I apparently, as far as this question asker understands it, it is currently a B&B. So.
No, I have not. I'm not even sure where it is, but I probably should know that, but I don't. I have not been to it. It sounds like it'd be a cool place to visit, though.
Absolutely. How is the strike on the obverse of the Tenji, especially at the lower right portion of the sundial numerals?
Let's go back and look at one of these. Well, it depends on the variety, but these things, were relatively crudely struck. They weren't done by modern machinery of 1816 or on, obviously. And you'll see some that are struck weakly, like this example right here, the 7T, in that direction. The other place that they're weakly struck is on Mind Your Business. You'll find that to be weak. And sometimes on the lower right, you'll find them weak as well. Here on the back, you can see the north above we, it's a little bit weak on the cinquefoil and the between States United and ES states. This particular variety shows some weakness. It also depends on the die crack. So like the 8B, I don't think I have a picture of the 8B. It has a die crack, I think, running through Mind Your Business that blanks out a good chunk of Mind Your Business. And that's, a lot of the people that want the type coin want to see Mind Your Business, and that blanks it out. And it's a really cool CUD. The people that want one type coin don't want that blacked out. They want to see Mind Your Business. So 8Bs, you're a little tricky to sell as type coins sometimes because of that. So you get, and Newman's book really has some good stuff here that'll tell you about where the cracks are. And I don't know if they get into weak strikes, but you will see weakness here, as you see on the lower left, sometimes around the we are one. I know on the 8-point stars, the bottom 8-point star is weakly struck, and it's rare to find both of them struck nicely, and those that sometimes command a premium. But and then on the front, some of the varieties, where the 1, 2, 3 are here, also could be weakly struck.
Absolutely. Sort of dates the time period, or just the methods that were available. For grade and affordability, which variety would you recommend for type collectors?
I'd recommend one of the Horde coins, 11X, 12X, 13X. If you want a high grade, a lot of those are going to be AU or UNC. AU 55, AU 53 to Mint State 63. Most of those fall in that category. Let me go back down here. So, I mean, these are going to be the price ranges for that, you know, AUs, you know, mid-state 63s, I think are 3,500 to 4,000. They're kind of starting to move up in price again a little bit. So that's what that would be. When you get into XF, and you can find them in XF and VF and those types, but there's other, once you get into, you can get out of a horde coin. If you go to VF especially, you're probably looking at non-horde coins as well. Even though there are R4s or R5s in some cases, unless it's got a low condition census where VF is the top of the census, you can get some R5s for not far from type money if they're not a red book variety, or maybe at type money in some cases. That, I think that's starting to change a little bit. For several years of the 2010s, you could buy R5s to type money, I think, unless they're in fine. As VFs is where that's starting to change. VF and above, they're starting to start coming in modest to premiums. But there's a whole bunch of VFs, a whole bunch of R4s that you can get at these numbers here. You might have to pay a little bit more if it's really choice color and choice surfaces, no plan flaws. If it's got a lot of plan flaws, you probably want a little bit less. You know, the plan flaws do add a personality characteristic to it, but you probably want to pay a little bit less than this. Unless it's a real rare variety, then you take it as you come. You can get them in VG to fine, you know, VG-ish or problem fines, you know, some corrosion and stuff for $300, $250, $350, depends on what the problems are. And you can still see a lot of it.
Oh, nice. Very insightful. What is your view on the origins of the restrikes, particularly the time made and who made them?
You know, I had some conversations with that 11 years ago with Eric, and I don't remember all the details. I do, because it wasn't anything that, I mean, it was interesting to me at the time because I wanted to hear about it, and I'll try to recant some of that, but I never got into collecting that. In the Civil War, I'm a big Civil War collector, but I spend most of my time on Union and Confederate money, more than I do on restrike type stuff. And like all of us, you know, we got to kind of focus at some level. Eric could expand out, you know, a lot further than I could. The time frame would have been, the time frame is actually not a surprise, because coin collecting, you know, large cents were withdrawn from circulation and replaced in 1857, and coin collecting kind of took off in the Northeast, where there was, you know, not just we're very wealthy people, but also a burgeoning upper middle class industrial society. In the South, there was a lot less. I mean, the South, you either were rich planters, and there was relatively few of those, or you were poor, white or black or other races, and you had a variety of subsistence existence to worse in the slavery case. So, I mean, people in the South, there wasn't much collecting in this kind of stuff, but in the Northeast, before the Civil War, and actually for some time after the Civil War, but in the Northeast is where the center of numismatics was in the 19th century. Because that's where a lot of the wealth was concentrated, particularly after the Civil War. And so by the time you get to the 1860s, even though the Civil War was going on, there were people, not everybody was in the front lines. I mean, they were well-to-do people that bought their way out of being drafted, or they were too old. I mean, if you were over 45, I don't think you went in the North at all. Maybe and I think they didn't even maybe even 35. I don't remember the exact years through the war, but you really weren't drafted if you were over a certain age, like most of us are that have time to collect this stuff and money. So there was an ongoing, you know, there was sort of a normalcy of life in the Northeast, save for Pennsylvania in 1863 for about a month. But and so people engaged in numismatics. There were auctions. And people got interested in recreating some of these old things that, you know, the 1804 cent. Restrike. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. So colonial paper money, colonial coins had a big following. And the reason why that is, think about it. A penny was still quite a bit of money for most people, but the upper middle class, the industrialists, and then the managers that managed those things that had money, and merchants and stuff that got interested in these things, couldn't afford to collect $20 gold pieces or $10 gold pieces or even silver dollars. And those things were sort of just spent or shunned or kept and hoarded for bullion value. But people were very interested in paper money and copper coins. That's the foundation of our numismatics. The other stuff, the silver and gold as collectibles, became popular later as inflation took hold, especially after 1913. We became much more wealthy and more interested in having the ability to collect things. Although I'm not sure, you still got to be pretty wealthy to collect $20 gold pieces by date. But that's where our heritage comes from. It came from fractional currency, and people made restrikes of these things to satisfy collectors' needs or altered, made up. There was a big variety boom in Confederate money for sure, and others in the 1880s that saw the creation of made-up varieties and things. And so the numismatics was very, very active in the 1870s, 1880s, and 1890s, but even the 1850s and 60s. As far as who did them, I don't think we know exactly. Or I don't know if he told me, I would have remembered that if he told me that. Maybe someone on here knows, but I don't know who made them, and I don't think we know who made a lot of that stuff.
Seems like it'd be very hard to track around that time.
I mean, we know there's a few instances of, not so much of Fugio, this stuff, but like we know who made the so-called Confederate cent, Lovett, because he spent one at a bar by accident and then revealed himself to have made them in the 1870s. So I mean, there's some things we know, but most of these things we really don't know, and or at least I don't know. There's experts that have studied those restrikes more than me.
Do we have any idea on how many of the Fugios survived?
Well, let's see. We got about 400,000. The survival rate of coppers of that period is like 1 to 2%, if I recall, from the large cent period, early large cents. I know we've done some studies on large cents, and I'm 1 to 2% sticks in my mind of survival rate for that. And if that's the case, then we're looking at 4 to 8,000. But there's a but. That would be the circulated ones. The but is that there was also a hoard, the New York bank hoard, that had some number of thousands in it too. So Fugios are a little more common than per the number made than like a 1794 large cent for that reason. And they're certainly a lot easier to find in mid-state than a 1794 large cent. And they're also, as you can see here, a hell of a lot cheaper than a 1794 large cent in mid-state. But I think they made a lot more 1794 large cent. I don't remember the mintage on 94 large cent, but I'm pretty sure it's higher than it may be higher than 400,000. But so these coins are quite a bit cheaper than like high grade mints because of the Bank of New York hoard. Now there's the Randall and Nichols hoards of 1796, 1797 large cents that you can get in mint state for a little bit more money than this, because those are popular dates, and more people collected large cents than Fugios. But so you could say 4 to 8,000 plus maybe another several thousand AUs in mint states. Maybe is what we're looking at here totally. But only I would say only a small city of people could own one. Everybody in Houston can't own one.
Absolutely. Do planchet flaws affect the value much on Fugios?
Modest planchet flaws, like I showed you on that 1L in the beginning. That's kind of average. Let's call that average. To use some of the real EAC lingo. Some people try to, when you get to mint state, you'll have a little bit of that going on. And of course, if you look at the prices realized at auctions and stuff, they tend to represent, gray sheet or retail value. Actually, it's pretty hard to buy a Fugio at auction at gray sheet, to be honest with you. You have to pay more than that. If they have some minor things, it's pretty typical. If they have like streaks and streaks going across it, and it's not a rare variety or consensus coin, then it tends to be shunned and it can be discounted 10 or 20%. Although if it's in a holder, some people buy the plastic, and if you discount it 10%, they're getting, to them it's a great deal. But but in general, if it depends on what it looks like. But on average, they have some modest stuff where it's not that horrible. Now, if you find Fugios without plan flaws, and I'm not talking about fines and very fines. I mean, you'll find those more easily because they wore. But if you find mid-state AU coins without plan flaws, I mean, that's they can command a little bit of a premium. But they're kind of part of the history of the coin. They're part of the coin. It just depends again on what it looks like. There are some coins out there that have some pretty bad plan flaws. If they're really bad, they may actually command a premium because if it's not man-made damage, it might be so cool that there's 3 or 4 people that might bid it up to end ways to Sunday. But the ones that are kind of ugly, are discounted, 10, 20%, even in a holder, depending on who you're selling it to.
Absolutely. By your estimate, about how many active collectors do you think are working on sets right now?
It depends on which set. Type coins, there are, I'm certain there are hundreds of people in the market for type coins at some level. When it gets into sets beyond that, I'd say it gets a lot smaller. I don't know. I know that there are a few dozen or a couple dozen collectors that try to get to 40 and higher varieties, but you really can't have more than about a couple dozen of them anyway, because you got to get to these R6s. There's a small number of those guys that are active based on recent auction prices and sales that I've had. I would say there's some new players coming in, not armies of people, but again, when you get to 40 varieties, you're getting into R6s. That means less than 30 known, and some of those are going to be pretty ugly, and there aren't 30 on the market. There may be 2. So you've got, I know there's a couple of dozen sets out there that are somewhere between, 30 varieties and 50 something varieties. There's a small, it gets to be pretty rarefied when you get to 50 varieties or higher. I'm not going to name names, but there's a few pretty well-known people. I mean, I'll name myself, but there's other people that are pretty well-known in the hobby that have 50 varieties or more. They're active if something comes up that upgrades them or they need. Nobody has all 61 of them. And there's some new players that appear to be collecting more than a Red Book collection, or at least a Red Book collection. So I'd say, there's a couple of dozen that are active at some level, and it kind of shows up in the price point. So R5s in VF and less don't command much of a premium, if any, unless the condition census. If it's an R5 and the top best coins are VFX, then they'll start commanding premiums because of what I just described. So that shows, that kind of gives you a hint as to how many people are active based on the price points of things in the condition census and stuff.
Absolutely.
It only would take, I would say, if there are 3 or 4 more players came in to try to go for 50 varieties, that could push prices up anywhere from 20 to 50%. It doesn't take, and likewise, if people drop out, it'll fall down to type prices. And that's kind of what happened in the 2010s. Not so much they dropped out. I didn't drop out. It's just that we became less active. So these things can fluctuate a bit depending on a relatively modest amount of activity. It's totally different than collecting Morgan dollars or Lincoln cents. These things, with the exception of some of the New York Hordes thing, I mean, they're all, well, this has less, the total mintage of this coin is less than the ONI SVB penny. So, and the survival rate's much lower. So, but there's a lot more people that collect Lincoln cents. So the market moves, it's more of a commodity there. This is more of a rarefied atmosphere, and doesn't take many people to move it either direction.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. Are there any parting words you'd like to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun doing this. The one thing I'd say is that there are fewer millionaires to compete with for really nice coins as compared to like large cents and stuff like that. There are some, but when you get these price points here as compared to 93, 90 Liberty Cap large cents and stuff like that, these are, there's a few more coins for sure because of the New York Hard. But when you get outside of it's interesting, when you get outside of the New York Hard or the coins that are very rare in the New York Hard, those are really rare coins, and they're quite affordable. I mean, a few Red Book varieties are expensive. So this is a pretty fun set. You could put together a real numismatic landmark thing for not a huge, I mean, a $90,000 13 coin collection would be a major landmark collection in numismatics, actually, because there's some really rare major things here. You're looking at 90 grand by the Red Book. And if you won't do that, and you're not going to go to one auction and do that, you're going to have to spend some time. So it's a hunt. It's not just show up at an auction and buy them all in one day.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for this hour. Thank you once again for the amazing presentation on these coffers, and we'll catch you all at the next presentation.
Thank you. Y'all have a good day.